They beat her until her own face became unrecognizable, then dumped her on a desert trail to let the California sun finish what their fists had started. Eliza Monroe's only crime? Uncovering a truth that powerful men would kill to bury. When rancher Caleb Rowan finds her broken body in the dust, he makes a choice that will shatter his quiet life forever. He decides to save her. But mercy has a price, and the men who left her for dead are still hunting. Will you stay with us until the end? Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far Eliza's story travels. Now, let's begin. The summer of 1873 had turned California's inland valleys into something resembling the surface of the sun. Heat rose in visible waves from the packed earth of the old mining trail, distorting the horizon until distant hills seemed to shimmer and dance like mirages. Sage and scrub brush clung to survival in the hard-pan soil, their gray-green leaves coated with a fine layer of dust that hadn't seen rain in 47 days. Caleb Rowan had been counting. His horse moved with the resigned patience of an animal that knew better than to waste energy in this heat. Caleb sat easy in the saddle, hat pulled low, bandana tied loose around his neck. The provisions he'd bought in town rattled gently in the saddlebags: flour, coffee, ammunition, a new leather strap for his harness. Everything a man needed to keep a ranch running when that ranch sat a hard day's ride from the nearest settlement. He preferred it that way. Had for the better part of 6 years now. The town of Coldwater Creek lay 3 hours behind him, already forgotten except for the weight of the supplies and the lingering taste of decent whiskey he'd allowed himself at the saloon. The ranch ahead meant solitude, routine, the kind of honest exhaustion that came from working land that fought you for every blade of grass. Caleb had made peace with that life. More than peace. He'd chosen it deliberately, the way a man chooses a hair shirt when he believes he deserves the discomfort. The war had ended 8 years ago, but some men never quite made it home. His horse's ears suddenly pricked forward, head turning slightly to the left. Caleb's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle in its scabbard before his conscious mind caught up. Out here, you learn to trust a horse's instincts. They heard things, smelled things, sensed things that human awareness missed. Easy, he murmured, more to himself than the animal. Then he saw it, a dark shape on the trail ahead, motionless in a landscape where nothing stayed still for long. Buzzards circled overhead, 3 of them, their lazy spirals tightening with predatory patience. As Caleb drew closer, the shape resolved into something that made his stomach tighten with recognition and dread. A body. Human. The posture all wrong, limbs arranged with the careless violence that spoke of intent rather than accident. Caleb reined in 20 feet away, every instinct screaming at him to keep riding. Out here, you didn't involve yourself in other people's trouble, didn't ask questions, didn't play hero. The unwritten law of survival in hard country was simple. Mind your own business, keep your head down, live another day. But even from this distance, he could see the flutter of fabric, a dress, torn and dust-covered, and movement, so slight he might have imagined it. A hand, fingers twitching against the dirt, still alive. Damn it, Caleb said quietly, knowing he'd already made his decision, already broken the rule that kept men safe in wild places. He dismounted slowly, ground-tying his horse with a word. The animal stood steady, well-trained enough not to spook at the smell of blood. And there was blood. Dark stains spread across blue calico fabric, dried to rust brown in the merciless sun. More blood-matted dark hair to a skull that showed ugly contusions even through the dust and grime. Caleb approached carefully, watching for any sign of a trap. Wouldn't be the first time bandits used a victim as bait. But the land remained empty, silent except for the whisper of hot wind through sage and the distant cry of the circling buzzards. Up close, the damage was worse. This wasn't robbery gone wrong or some random act of frontier violence. This was methodical, deliberate. Someone had beaten this woman with focused rage, the kind that came from wanting to send a message or silence a voice. Her face was swollen almost beyond recognition, lips split and crusted with dried blood. One eye had disappeared into purple-black tissue. Her hands showed defensive wounds, split knuckles, broken fingernails, the marks of someone who'd fought back before being overwhelmed. The dress was quality fabric beneath the damage, not the rough homespun of a settler's wife. Town clothes. Maybe even city clothes. She drew a shallow, rattling breath. Her one visible eye cracked open, fixing on him with an intensity that seemed impossible given her condition. The eye was gray-green, the color of winter sage, and held more awareness than he'd expected. Her lips moved. No sound emerged, but Caleb read the shape of the word. Help. He knelt beside her, mindful of his own shadow blocking the sun from her face. Can you hear me? The slightest nod, more felt than seen. I'm going to move you. It's going to hurt. Another minute movement of acknowledgement. Her functioning eye closed briefly, bracing. Caleb slid his arms beneath her as gently as possible, lifting with his legs the way you'd lift anything precious and fragile. She weighed nothing, all bones and dehydration. A sound escaped her. Not quite a scream, more like air forced from lungs that couldn't manage full breath. Her body went rigid, then went limp as consciousness fled. Probably better that way. The horse shifted nervously as Caleb approached with his burden, nostrils flaring at the scent of blood and suffering. Steady, Caleb murmured, using the voice he reserved for spooked animals and wounded soldiers. Steady now. He couldn't ride with her, not in this condition. Instead, he fashioned a rough travois from the emergency supplies he always carried: leather straps, a worn blanket, 2 strong branches cut from a scrub oak with his belt knife. Frontier medicine learned from necessity and experience. The construction took 20 minutes he wasn't sure she had, but rushing would only make things worse. When he finally secured her to the makeshift litter and tied it to his saddle, the sun had moved a full hand's width across the sky. The buzzards had grown bolder, descending in tightening circles. One landed 50 yards away, hopping closer with the patient confidence of a creature that knew how this usually ended. Caleb threw a rock that sent it squawking back to the sky. The ride home took on the quality of nightmare. Every jolt of the travois across rough ground drew sounds from his unconscious passenger that he felt in his chest. The horse moved with uncommon care, as if understanding the cargo's fragility. Still, there was no way to avoid every rock, every rut, every irregularity in a trail never meant for this purpose. Caleb found himself talking, keeping up a steady stream of words more for his own benefit than hers. Ranch is another hour, got a decent bed, clean water. Had to doctor myself a few times, so I know the basics. You just hold on. No response. He hadn't expected one. The sun continued its merciless arc. Caleb stopped twice to wet her cracked lips with water from his canteen, careful not to choke her. The second time, her eye opened briefly, tracking his movement with something that might have been gratitude or might have been fear. Not going to hurt you, he said quietly. You're safe now. He wasn't sure that was true, but it seemed like something she needed to hear. His ranch appeared in the distance like salvation, a low-slung house of split logs and stone, barn and corral, a windmill turning slowly in the hot breeze. Not much to look at, but solid. Built to last through harsh winters and harsher summers. Built to shelter a man who wanted to be left alone. That solitude was ending, Caleb knew, as surely as winter followed fall. Getting her inside required all his strength and every scrap of remaining gentleness. The cabin's interior was neat by bachelor standards. Swept floor, made bed, dishes clean and stacked. No woman had set foot here in 6 years. Felt strange, carrying one across the threshold now, even under these circumstances. He laid her on his bed, the only bed, knowing he'd be sleeping on the floor for however long this took. If she survived. The thought arrived unbidden and unwelcome, bringing with it memories of field hospitals and the particular smell of men dying despite everything you did to save them. Caleb pushed the memories back down where they belonged. First things first. He needed to assess the damage, which meant cutting away the ruined dress. He worked with clinical detachment learned in the Army medical tents, focusing on the task rather than the person. The fabric parted under his knife to reveal more bruising, more evidence of sustained violence. Ribs showed dark purple. Her breathing stayed shallow, labored. He found a knife wound in her side, crude stitching already attempted with what looked like regular thread and an unsteady hand. The stitches had held, barely, but the wound showed signs of infection, heat, redness, the beginning of corruption. Someone had tried to help her before abandoning her to the desert, or maybe she'd sewn herself back together. Either way, those stitches needed to come out and be redone. Caleb built up the fire despite the heat, setting water to boil. He'd learned from army surgeons that clean was crucial, even if he didn't fully understand why. Something about invisible creatures that caused fever. Sounded like superstition, but men who'd followed the practice lost fewer patients, so he'd adopted it as gospel. While the water heated, he cleaned the surface wounds with wet cloth, gentle as he knew how. She didn't wake, which concerned him more than it reassured. A body shutting down this completely sometimes didn't start back up. The work took hours. He removed the infected stitches, cleaned the knife wound with boiled water and whiskey that made her body jerk even unconscious, then re-sewed with proper technique using boiled thread. The other wounds he dressed with clean bandages, though there wasn't much to do for broken ribs except bind them and wait. Throughout it all, she remained limp, breathing but not quite present. Night fell before Caleb finished. He'd lit lamps against the darkness, turning his small cabin into an island of light in an ocean of wilderness. His hands shook slightly as he washed blood from them for the third time. Exhaustion pulled at him, but sleep felt impossible. Instead, he sat in the chair he'd pulled beside the bed, watching her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her chest like a miser counting coins. As long as she kept breathing, there was hope. Her face, cleaned of dirt and blood, showed the woman beneath the violence. Younger than he'd thought, maybe late 20s, maybe 30, fine features, sharp cheekbones, a mouth that probably smiled easily when it wasn't split and swollen. The kind of face you'd see behind a bank counter or in a courthouse, belonging to someone with education and position, which raised the question that had been circling his mind since he'd found her. What the hell had happened? People didn't end up beaten near to death on desert trails by accident. Didn't end up stripped of everything but a ruined dress and dumped like garbage. This was personal, targeted. Someone had wanted her dead badly enough to do the work themselves, and Caleb had just stepped directly into the middle of whatever this was. He should have kept riding, should have convinced himself the shape on the trail was already dead, nothing to be done. Should have protected his own peace, his own carefully constructed solitude. Instead, he sat in the lamplight listening to a stranger breathe, and wondered what violence he'd invited into his life by choosing mercy over common sense. Around midnight, she stirred. Not much, just a slight turn of her head, a soft sound that might have been pain or might have been something deeper. Caleb leaned forward, watching her face. The swelling had gone down slightly with the cool cloths he'd been applying. Her visible eye moved beneath the lid, tracking dreams he couldn't see. "You're safe," he said again, even though she probably couldn't hear him. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." The words felt like a promise, one he wasn't sure he could keep but made anyway. Her lips moved, forming syllables too soft to hear. Caleb leaned closer, catching fragments. "Told them. Papers. Can't let..." Fever talk, probably. Or the remnants of whatever trauma had put her on that trail. He dampened a cloth and laid it across her forehead, watching her settle back into stillness. The night stretched long. Caleb dozed in the chair, jerking awake at every change in her breathing, every small movement. Years of light sleeping in war zones had trained him to wake at the smallest disturbance. Peacetime hadn't broken the habit. Dawn came gray and uncertain through the cabin's single window. Caleb stood stiffly, back protesting the hours in the chair. He needed coffee, needed to check the animals, needed to do something normal to anchor himself in routine. But first, he checked her temperature with the back of his hand against her forehead. Warm, but not dangerously so. The fever might break, or might spike and take her. Only time would tell. He was building up the fire when she spoke. "Water." The word was barely a whisper, rough as sandpaper, but conscious and deliberate. Caleb grabbed the water bucket and dipper, moving quickly to the bedside. He slid a hand behind her head, lifting gently, bringing the dipper to her cracked lips. She drank in small sips, throat working with obvious difficulty. When she'd had enough, she pulled back slightly, and Caleb eased her head back to the pillow. Her eye opened, just the one, the other still too swollen. It fixed on him with laser focus, studying his face with an intensity that felt like being read. "Who are you?" The question emerged in that same broken whisper. "Caleb Rowan. This is my ranch." Found you on the trail yesterday. She processed this slowly, eye never leaving his face. Why? The question held more weight than its single syllable suggested. Why had he stopped? Why had he helped? Why was she still alive? Seemed like the right thing to do at the time, Caleb said. Might have been wrong. Time will tell. Something flickered in her eye. Might have been humor. Might have been despair. Should have kept writing. Probably. They'll come. Who will? But she'd already slipped back under, the brief moment of consciousness exhausted. Caleb sat back in his chair, considering those two words. They'll come. Not a question, a certainty. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at land that had been peaceful for 6 years running. The sun was climbing now, burning off the night's slight coolness. His horses moved in the corral, waiting for breakfast. The chickens would be wanting release from their coop. Life on a ranch followed predictable rhythms, demanded attention regardless of whatever human drama unfolded inside cabin walls. Caleb turned back to look at the woman in his bed, still unconscious, still struggling. He'd saved her life, maybe, or just postponed the inevitable. Either way, he'd made his choice on that dusty trail, and there was no going back now. He pulled on his hat and went out to tend the animals, leaving the cabin door open so he could hear if she called out. The morning routine grounded him. Feed, water, check fences, carry hay. Physical work that required attention but not thought. But his rifle, usually left on its pegs above the door, went with him. Leaned against the fence while he worked, close at hand. Because she was right, of course. They would come. Whoever had done this to her, whoever had left her for dead, they'd want to make sure the job was finished. And when they learned a rancher had interfered, had taken her in and saved her life, well, Caleb had broken the first rule of survival in hard country, and now he'd have to live with whatever came next. The sun climbed higher, heat building toward another brutal day. Caleb finished the chores and stood in his yard, looking at the cabin that had been his sanctuary. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the smell of the coffee he'd put on before coming outside. Through the open door, he could just see the edge of the bed where she lay. A stranger. A mystery. A problem he'd chosen to make his own. He thought about the war, about the choices men made when violence came calling. You could run or you could stand, could save yourself or try to save others. He'd done both in his time, and neither had brought peace. Maybe that was the point. Maybe peace wasn't the goal, just a temporary condition between storms. Caleb picked up his rifle and headed back inside, closing the door firmly behind him. He had a patient to monitor, coffee to drink, and whoever was coming to prepare for. The solitary life he'd built was over. Had been over the moment he'd reined in his horse and decided to look closer at that shape on the trail. Now there was only forward, into whatever came next, with a woman who knew secrets dangerous enough to kill for and a promise he'd made to keep her safe. The storm was coming. Caleb could feel it in his bones, the way old soldiers felt weather changes in wounds that never quite healed right. All he could do was stand in its path and refuse to break. She slept through that first full day and into the second, her body claiming the rest it desperately needed. Caleb maintained his vigil, dividing time between necessary ranch work and watching over her. He changed her bandages twice, noting with cautious relief that the knife wound showed no fresh signs of infection. The fever he'd feared never materialized beyond a slight warmth that broke the second night. On the third morning, she woke fully. Caleb was at the stove, frying salt pork for breakfast, when he heard the rustle of movement behind him. He turned to find her sitting upright, one hand pressed against her bandaged ribs, the other gripping the edge of the mattress. Both eyes were open now, though one still carried the shadow of bruising around its socket. She looked at him with complete awareness. The fog of unconsciousness finally lifted. "Easy," he said, setting down the fork. "You'll tear those stitches if you move too fast." She ignored the warning, swinging her legs over the side of the bed with visible effort. The oversized work shirt he'd dressed her in, his own, the only clean thing large enough, hung past her knees. Her feet were bare, pale against the rough wooden floor. "Where are my clothes?" Her voice was stronger now, though still rough. Caleb heard education in the careful diction, heard steel beneath the damage. "Burned them, weren't salvageable." He moved the pan off the heat. "You've been here 3 days. Name's Caleb Rowan, in case you don't remember from before." "I remember." She studied him with the same intensity as that first moment of consciousness, cataloging details. Her gaze moved to the rifle by the door, the locked trunk in the corner, the single window with its view of empty rangeland. Assessing exits, threats, options. The calculations of someone who'd learned not to trust safety at face value. "You got a name?" Caleb asked. A pause, long enough to be noticeable. "Eliza." "Eliza Monroe." "Miss or Mrs.? Does it matter?" "Might, to whoever's looking for you." She went very still, the kind of stillness prey animals achieve when predators pass close. "What makes you think anyone's looking?" Caleb poured coffee into 2 tin cups, carried one to her. She took it with both hands, and he noticed the tremor she tried to hide. People don't end up beaten half to death on desert trails by accident, and when they wake up, first words out of their mouth are usually, "Who did this?" or "Where am I?" Yours were, "They'll come." "So yeah, I figure someone's looking." Eliza sipped the coffee, using the moment to think. When she spoke again, her voice carried careful neutrality. "I'm grateful for your help, Mr. Rowan, truly, but you should take me to town, to the sheriff. This isn't your problem." "Already made it my problem when I stopped." Caleb settled into his chair, cradling his own cup. "And town's a full day's ride. You're not strong enough for that yet. I'm stronger than I look." "Maybe. But those ribs are cracked at minimum, possibly broken. That knife wound needs another week to close properly. Push yourself now, you'll tear open and bleed out before we're halfway there." She set down the coffee cup with a sharp click. "Then loan me a horse. I'll manage." "To go where exactly?" The question hung between them. Eliza's jaw tightened, and Caleb saw her recognize the trap of her own situation. She had nowhere to go. No resources, no allies, possibly no one she could trust. The desperation in her eyes confirmed what he'd already suspected. She was running from something bigger than common criminals. "I won't bring trouble to your door," she said finally. "You've been kind, more than kind, but I won't repay that by putting you in danger." "Little late for that conversation," Caleb gestured toward the window. "You've been here 3 days. Anyone tracking you probably already knows. Way I see it, we're in this together now, whether we like it or not." "You don't understand what you're—" "Then explain it to me." Eliza stood abruptly, swaying slightly before catching her balance against the bedpost. She moved to the window, keeping her back to him. The morning light silhouetted her frame, showing how thin she'd become. Caleb waited, giving her time to decide how much truth to share. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I worked as a clerk at the First Bank of Sacramento, kept books, processed accounts, filed paperwork. Boring work. Safe work." She touched the glass with one finger, tracing patterns. 6 months ago, I noticed discrepancies. Small ones at first. Numbers that didn't quite balance. Transfers that seemed odd. Nothing dramatic enough to raise immediate alarm, but enough to make me curious. "You should have stayed curious and left it alone," Caleb said quietly. "Probably." A bitter laugh. "I started keeping my own records, copying documents after hours, building evidence. The pattern became clear. Someone was using the bank to move money illegally. Large sums, hidden in legitimate transactions. When I finally understood the scope of it, I knew I needed help." "Let me guess. You went to the wrong person." Eliza turned to face him, and the expression in her eyes was older than her years. "I went to the bank president, Mr. Harrison Webb. Trusted him. Believed he'd want to know his institution was being used for criminal purposes." She touched her side where the knife wound lay beneath shirt and bandages. 3 days later, Harrison Webb was found dead in his office, single gunshot to the chest, and I was named as the primary suspect. Caleb absorbed this, pieces falling into unwelcome place. "The real killer framed you." "More than that. They made me disappear, used their connections to paint me as a thief and a murderer, put out wanted notices, offered a reward." Her voice stayed steady, but her hands gripped the windowsill hard enough to whiten knuckles. "I ran, took what evidence I'd gathered, and ran. Made it 2 weeks before they caught up to me outside Coldwater Creek." "The beating?" "Yes, 2 men. They wanted to know where I'd hidden the documents, wanted names of anyone I'd told. When I wouldn't talk," she gestured vaguely at her healing face, "they got creative. Thought they'd killed me. Left me on that trail to rot. Caleb stood, moved to the stove, poured himself more coffee he didn't want. The story made sense in the way nightmares made sense. Internal logic leading to terrible conclusions. The evidence. You still have it? Hidden. Not on me, not anywhere they'd think to look. But they're still searching. They won't stop, can't stop. What I have proves everything. The money laundering, the network of corrupt officials, all of it. If that information reaches the right authorities, a lot of powerful people go to prison. Caleb turned the tin cup in his hands, thinking, or you end up dead and the information dies with you. That's their preferred outcome, yes. The cabin fell silent except for the pop and hiss of the fire. Outside, one of Caleb's horses whinnied and another answered. Normal sounds of normal life thrown into sharp relief by the abnormality of everything else. You should have told me this before I wasted 3 days patching you up, Caleb said finally. Would it have changed anything? He considered the question honestly. Would he have left her on that trail if he'd known she carried this much trouble? Known that helping her meant painting a target on his own back? No, he admitted. Probably not, but I like knowing what I'm walking into. Now you know, so what happens next? Caleb met her eyes, saw the challenge there. She expected him to throw her out, to protect himself. Probably thought he had every right to do so. Hell, maybe he did. But the image of her broken body in the dust wouldn't leave his mind, and neither would the certainty that sending her away now was just a slower form of murder. Next, you sit down and eat something before you fall down, he said. Then you rest. Get your strength back. When you're healed enough to travel, we'll figure out the next step. There's a wanted poster with my name on it. Every lawman in California is looking for me. Then we'll be careful. They'll kill you too, for helping me, for knowing. Let them try. The words came out harder than he'd intended, edged with something dark he usually kept buried. I've been shot at before. Survived it. I'll survive this. Eliza searched his face, looking for something. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slowly and moved back to the bed, sitting with visible relief. Caleb brought her a plate of salt pork and day-old bread. She ate slowly, mechanically, someone going through necessary motions. Why? She asked between bites. Why help me? You don't know me. Owe me nothing. Caleb settled back into his chair, considering how to answer. The truth was complicated, tangled up in war memories and guilt, and the particular kind of exhaustion that came from 6 years of running from your own conscience. I watched a lot of people die in the war, he said finally. Some I could save, most I couldn't. After a while, you get tired of standing by while people suffer, tired of choosing safety over doing what's right. He met her eyes. You were dying on that trail. I could help or I could ride past. Seemed like a simple choice at the time. Doesn't feel simple now, I'd wager. No, but I've made worse decisions with better information. A ghost of a smile touched her damaged mouth. That's supposed to be reassuring? It's supposed to be honest. She finished eating in silence. When she was done, Caleb took the plate and washed it in the basin, giving her privacy to process everything. He understood the weight of her situation, the impossible position of being both victim and fugitive, of knowing the truth but having no safe way to prove it. I need to go into town, he said, drying the plate. Running low on supplies, and I should check if anyone's asking questions. See what stories are circulating. Eliza's head snapped up. That's too dangerous. If they're watching for a woman, not a rancher coming in for flour and coffee. I'll be careful. Keep my ears open. He set the plate aside. You stay here. Rest. There's food in the cupboard, water in the bucket. Don't answer the door for anyone. Caleb, I'll be back before dark. Lock the door behind me. He collected his hat and rifle, checked his ammunition. Eliza watched from the bed, worry plain on her face despite her attempts to hide it. At the door, he paused. Those men who beat you, you get a good look at them? Good enough. Why? Just wondering if I'd recognize them if they showed up. One was tall, thin, dressed like a businessman. Spoke with an accent. British, maybe? The other was shorter, built like a bull, scar across his left cheek. Her voice went flat, reciting facts to distance herself from memory. The tall one did most of the talking, called the other one Dutch. Caleb filed the descriptions away. They say anything about who sent them? No names, but the British one, he knew things. About the bank, about Webb's murder. He wasn't hired muscle. He was connected. Part of it. I'll keep an eye out. The ride to Coldwater Creek took 4 hours under a sun that seemed determined to bake every drop of moisture from the land. Caleb kept to the main trail, playing the role of ordinary rancher on ordinary business. He passed 2 other travelers, a freight wagon heading south, and a family in a covered wagon going the opposite direction. Both times he tipped his hat and kept moving, offering nothing but the basic courtesy distance required. The town appeared as a scatter of buildings against the foothills, wood and brick structures clustered around a main street that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it didn't. Coldwater Creek serviced the scattered ranches and failing mines in the area, providing the essentials: general store, saloon, boarding house, blacksmith, and a sheriff's office that usually sat empty except for the deputy who preferred cards to law enforcement. Caleb tied his horse outside the general store and went in, nodding to Mrs. Patterson behind the counter. She was a widow who'd run the place for 15 years, knew everyone's business, and loved sharing that knowledge with anyone who'd listen. "Mr. Rowan," she said, brightening, "haven't seen you in town for a spell. The usual?" "Yes, ma'am. Flour, coffee, sugar if you've got it." She bustled about gathering his order, chattering as she worked. "Been quite exciting around here lately. You hear about the murder up in Sacramento? Banker got himself shot. They're saying a woman did it. Can you imagine? Young thing, too, according to the notices." Caleb kept his expression neutral. "That so?" "Sheriff got a wire about it 3 days ago. Woman's name is Eliza Monroe. There's a reward, $500 for information leading to her capture." Mrs. Patterson leaned across the counter conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I think she probably had good reason. Man doesn't get shot in his own office without making enemies." "500's a lot of money," Caleb observed, counting out coins. "It is indeed. Half the miners in the hills are probably out looking for her now." She wrapped his purchases in brown paper. "Though I don't imagine they'd find much. Woman on her own wouldn't last long out here." "Probably not," Caleb agreed, collecting his supplies. "She say what direction she was heading?" "Wire didn't specify, just said she was dangerous and should be considered armed." Mrs. Patterson sniffed. "As if a woman could be that much threat. Men and their dramatics." Caleb thanked her and left, his mind churning. $500 was enough to turn even honest men into bounty hunters. If word was spreading, he'd have every drifter and opportunist in the territory searching for Eliza. And if professional killers were also looking, the situation was even worse than she'd described. He made one more stop, the saloon, where information flowed more freely than whiskey. The place was half full despite the early hour, miners and ranch hands seeking relief from heat and boredom. Caleb ordered a beer and found a spot at the bar where he could listen. "Heard she killed him over money, banking fraud or some such. $500. That's what I heard. Maybe more if you bring her in alive." 2 men came through yesterday asking questions, city types, said they were federal marshals, but I had my doubts. Caleb nursed his beer, absorbing fragments. The stories varied, but the core remained consistent. Woman wanted for murder, substantial reward, lots of people looking. And the mention of 2 men claiming to be marshals set alarm bells ringing. Federal authorities would have shown proper identification, made their presence official. These men were hiding behind false credentials. The ones who'd beaten her, most likely. Still searching. He finished his drink and headed back into the brutal sunshine. His horse stood patient in the shade, flicking flies with its tail. Caleb secured his supplies and was preparing to mount when a voice called out, "Rowan, got a minute?" Deputy Harris approached from the direction of the sheriff's office, moving with the casual authority of someone who wore a badge but rarely had to back it up. He was young, mid-20s, still believed the law was clear-cut and justice inevitable. "Deputy," Caleb acknowledged. "Something I can help you with?" "Just wondering if you'd seen anything unusual out your way. We're looking for someone. A woman, dangerous fugitive from Sacramento." "Heard about that in the store. Haven't seen anyone." Harris studied him with eyes too shrewd for someone who spent his days playing cards. "You're pretty far out. Woman on foot probably couldn't make it that far into the desert." "Probably not," Caleb agreed. "Like I said, haven't seen anyone. My land, my animals, that's it." You'd tell me if you did, right? There's a reward. Could use the money, I'd bet. Everyone could use money, Deputy. Doesn't mean we all go chasing it. Something in his tone made Harris step back slightly. The deputy had never served in combat, never learned to read the dangerous quiet that settled over certain men. Caleb saw that Harris wanted to push harder, ask more questions, maybe even demand to search the ranch. But something, instinct, self-preservation, or simple common sense, held him back. Well, you keep an eye out, Harris said finally. Woman's considered extremely dangerous. Don't approach her alone if you spot her. Send word to town. Will do. Caleb mounted and turned his horse toward home, feeling Harris's eyes on his back until he'd cleared the town limits. The conversation had been expected, but still unsettling. If the deputy was asking questions now, it was only a matter of time before those questions became more pointed. The ride back felt longer, heat and worry making miles stretch. Caleb found himself pushing the horse faster than wise, anxiety growing with each passing hour. He'd left Eliza alone, vulnerable, with only a locked door and her own damaged body for protection. If someone had followed him, tracked him back to the ranch. The cabin appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its descent toward evening. Everything looked normal, no strange horses, no signs of disturbance. But Caleb's heart didn't slow until he dismounted and tried the door. Locked, as he'd instructed. "Eliza," he called, "it's me." A pause, then the scrape of the bolt sliding back. The door opened to reveal her standing with his rifle in her hands, properly held, finger off the trigger, but ready. She'd found his spare clothes and dressed in pants that had to be rolled at the cuffs, and a shirt that hung loose. The transformation made her look younger, more vulnerable, despite the weapon. "Trouble?" she asked, lowering the rifle. "Depends how you define it." Caleb brought in his supplies, relocked the door. "Town's buzzing about you. Wanted posters are up, rewards being offered. Deputy asked me questions." Eliza's face went carefully blank. "What did you tell him?" "That I hadn't seen anyone, but he's not stupid, and neither are the two men posing as federal marshals who came through yesterday asking questions. They're here." Not a question, a statement of inevitable fact. "Seems like." Caleb set about putting away supplies, needing something to do with his hands. "Town gossip says you killed a banker for money. Banking fraud. There's talk of $500 reward, maybe more." "500. She laughed without humor. "They're serious about keeping me quiet." "The men who beat you, tall British fellow and a shorter one called Dutch, those match the descriptions of your martial impersonators?" "Almost certainly." Eliza moved to the window, peering out at the darkening landscape. "They won't stop. They'll search every ranch, every cabin, every place someone could hide. It's only a matter of time before they come here." Caleb knew she was right. The ranch was remote, but not invisible. Anyone asking in town would learn about the hermit rancher who lived a day's ride out. Would learn he'd been to town today, bought supplies, acted nervous. Would put pieces together. "Then we need a plan," he said. "Because I'm not handing you over, and I'm not dying without a fight." She turned from the window, and in the fading light he saw both fear and determination in her expression. "The evidence I hid, it's in Sacramento, in a bank vault under a false name. If we could retrieve it, take it to honest authorities. Sacramento's 2 weeks hard travel, maybe more with you still healing." "I know, but it's the only way to prove my innocence, the only way to stop them." Caleb pulled out his chair, sat heavily. The enormity of what she was suggesting pressed down on him. Leave the ranch. Travel to a city where she was wanted for murder. Break into a bank vault. Steal evidence. And somehow deliver it to authorities who might already be compromised. The plan had so many points of failure, it was almost laughable. Almost. "You're asking a lot," he said quietly. "Asking me to risk everything on the word of someone I just met." "I know." Her voice was steady. "And I wouldn't blame you for refusing, for telling me to leave, to handle this myself. You've already done more than anyone had a right to expect." But I'm asking anyway, because I can't do this alone, because those men will kill me if they find me, and because—" She hesitated, then continued, "because I think you're the kind of man who finishes what he starts, who doesn't walk away when things get hard. Caleb thought about the war again, about the promises he'd made to dying men, promises to carry letters home, to tell their families they'd been brave, to make sure their deaths meant something. He'd kept those promises, everyone, even when it hurt. This felt similar. He'd saved her life. That created obligation, whether he wanted it or not. "We'll need to move carefully," he said. "Plan every step. One mistake and we're both dead." Relief flooded her face. "You'll help?" "Already am helping. Question now is whether we're smart enough to survive it." He stood, moved to the window beside her. Full dark had fallen, stars emerging in the vast sky. "We'll leave in 3 days. Give you time to heal more. Give me time to make arrangements." "But Eliza?" "Yes?" "If this goes wrong, if we're caught, I want your word you'll tell the truth. That I didn't help you commit murder, didn't know you were wanted until after I'd already saved you." She met his eyes, understanding what he was offering. "I'll tell them everything, I promise." "Good enough." They stood together at the window, watching darkness swallow the landscape. Somewhere out there, men were hunting. Somewhere violence was gathering. But for now, in this moment, they had each other and a plan that might, just might, keep them alive long enough to see justice done. It would have to be enough. The 3 days passed in tense preparation. Caleb spent hours checking equipment, oiling saddles, selecting the strongest horses. Eliza's recovery progressed faster than he'd expected. Youth and determination driving her past pain that would have kept most people bedridden another week. By the second day, she was moving without visible wincing. By the third, she was helping with chores, insisting on earning her keep despite his protests. They left before dawn on the fourth day, the world still dark and cool. Caleb had plotted a route that avoided main trails, choosing instead the harder paths through hill country where travelers were sparse and questions fewer. They carried enough supplies for 2 weeks, rifles within easy reach, and the constant awareness that every stranger they passed might recognize Eliza's face from the wanted posters. The first 2 days were uneventful. They rode in companionable silence mostly, stopping only to rest the horses and eat cold meals that required no fire. At night they made camp in hidden hollows, taking turns at watch. Caleb noticed how Eliza never fully relaxed, how her hand drifted toward the knife he'd given her whenever sounds emerged from the darkness. War had taught him the same hypervigilance. Some things you never unlearned. On the third day, they encountered their first real test. The trail they'd been following merged with a larger road, and Caleb spotted dust rising in the distance. Riders, moving fast. He pulled up sharply, Eliza responding instantly to his tension. "How many?" she asked, voice low. 3, maybe 4. Coming this way. We can't outrun them, not on this terrain." Caleb scanned their surroundings, mind working through options. To their left, a rocky outcropping offered cover, but would trap them if the riders proved hostile. To the right, open ground provided escape routes, but no concealment. Ahead, the road stretched straight and exposed. "Act natural," he decided. "We're just travelers. You're my wife. We're heading to Sacramento to visit family. Keep your hat low. Don't make eye contact." Eliza pulled her hat brim down without argument, hunching slightly in the saddle to disguise her frame. The riders resolved into 4 men as they approached, rough types, armed and dusty from hard travel. Not lawmen. Not exactly outlaws, either. The kind of men who existed in the gray spaces between. The leader raised a hand in greeting as they closed distance. "Morning, folks." "Morning," Caleb returned, keeping his tone friendly but not inviting. "You headed to Sacramento?" "That's right, visiting my wife's sister." The leader's eyes lingered on Eliza. She kept her head down, playing the role of shy frontier wife. But Caleb saw the man's hand drift toward his saddlebag, saw the calculation in his expression. "Funny thing," the leader said slowly. "There's a woman wanted out of Sacramento. Murder and theft. Substantial reward for information." His companions spread out slightly, hands near weapons. "Your wife there, she matches the description pretty close." "My wife doesn't match any description except the one that says she's mine," Caleb said, steel entering his voice. "And I'd appreciate you not insulting her with accusations." "No insult intended, friend. Just doing my civic duty." Maybe if the lady would show her face proper we could clear this up quick. Or maybe you could move along and let honest people travel in peace. The tension crystallized, 4 against 2, the mathematics of violence hanging in the hot air. Caleb's rifle rested across his saddle, casual but ready. He knew these men were weighing their options, $500 against the risk of a fight with an armed man who clearly knew which end of a gun to point. Easy now, the leader said, raising both hands. No need for trouble, just asking questions. And I've answered them. My wife and I are traveling to Sacramento. We've got no interest in rewards or wanted fugitives. Now, if you'll excuse us. Caleb urged his horse forward, Eliza following his lead. The 4 men parted slowly, letting them pass but watching every movement. Caleb felt their eyes on his back for a full minute before the sound of hoofbeats indicated the group was moving on. Neither he nor Eliza spoke until the riders disappeared from view. Only then did she let out a long breath. That was close. Too close. Word spreading faster than I expected. Caleb scanned the horizon, uneasy. We need to stay off main roads completely. It'll add days to the journey, but it's safer. They veered into rougher country, following game trails and dried creek beds. The terrain slowed their progress, but Caleb felt better with rock and trees around them. Harder to be ambushed. Harder to be tracked. That night they camped in a canyon, building a small fire only after full dark when the smoke would be less visible. Eliza sat close to the flames, hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. The firelight softened her features, making her look younger, more vulnerable. The bruises had faded to yellow-green shadows, barely visible now. Tell me about the evidence, Caleb said. What exactly did you find? Eliza stared into the fire, organizing her thoughts. Harrison Webb was careful. The scheme was elegant, almost beautiful in its complexity. He used the bank's legitimate business to hide illegal transactions. Money would come in from mining operations, land sales, investments. But some of that money, the criminal money, got mixed with the legal funds, then transferred to accounts controlled by his partners. How much money are we talking about? Hundreds of thousands, maybe more. I only saw 6 months of records, but the pattern suggested it had been running for years. She took a sip of coffee. Webb had a network. Politicians who turned blind eyes, lawmen who didn't ask questions, businessmen who provided cover. It was sophisticated, professional. And you documented all of it. Everything I could find. Ledgers showing the real transactions versus the official ones. Letters discussing the arrangements. A list of names. Everyone involved. Her voice hardened. When I showed it to Webb, I thought he'd be horrified. Thought he'd want to stop it, clean up the bank. Instead, he looked at me like I'd just signed my own death warrant. Because he was in on it. He wasn't just in on it. He was running it. The whole thing was his operation. I'd handed my evidence to the mastermind himself. She laughed bitterly. 3 days later, he was dead, and I was framed for his murder. Neat and clean. Caleb fed another stick to the fire, thinking. Who killed Webb then? If he was running the operation, why kill him? I've thought about that constantly. My guess? He panicked when I confronted him. Maybe threatened to confess, turn on his partners, or maybe they just decided he was a liability once I'd uncovered the scheme. Easier to kill him and blame me than risk him breaking under pressure. So there's someone above Webb, someone still pulling strings. Has to be. The resources they've deployed, the reach they have, Webb couldn't have managed that alone, and certainly not from beyond the grave. Eliza met his eyes across the fire. Whoever it is, they're powerful enough to corrupt federal marshals, manipulate law enforcement, put substantial bounties on my head. We're not just fighting criminals, Caleb. We're fighting the system itself. The weight of that statement settled between them. Caleb had seen corruption during the war, had watched good men die while profiteers grew rich off their suffering. But he'd thought peacetime would be different, cleaner. The revelation that the rot ran this deep filled him with a familiar, weary anger. Where's the evidence hidden? He asked. Wells Fargo Vault in Sacramento. I have an account under the name Elizabeth Grant, my mother's maiden name. The evidence is in a sealed envelope in a safety deposit box. The keys with me. She touched her pocket where a small bulge suggested the key's presence. Once we retrieve it, we need to get it to someone who can't be bought, someone with enough power to act on it. Federal authorities in San Francisco, maybe. or a newspaper that's not afraid of powerful enemies. Either way, we have to survive long enough to reach them. They let the fire die down to coals, each retreating into their own thoughts. Caleb took first watch, sitting with his rifle across his knees while Eliza curled in her bedroll. The night was alive with small sounds: insects, distant coyotes, the rustle of wind through scrub brush, normal sounds, peaceful sounds. He let them wash over him, storing calm against the storm he knew was coming. Eliza relieved him at midnight, and he slept fitfully, dreams filled with gunfire and blood and the faces of men he'd killed during the war. He woke before dawn to find her staring east, waiting for sunrise with the patient stillness of someone who'd learned to treasure quiet moments. They rode on. Days blurred together, hard travel, careful concealment, the constant tension of being hunted. They saw other travelers occasionally, giving them wide berth when possible, maintaining their cover story when forced into conversation. Twice more they encountered men who looked at Eliza too long, whose questions probed too deep. Both times Caleb's steady nerves and ready weapons convinced them to let it go, but he knew their luck wouldn't hold forever. Sacramento appeared on the horizon like a mirage after 9 days of travel. The city sprawled along the river, buildings of brick and wood rising above the waterfront, church spires reaching toward a sky heavy with afternoon heat. Population, commerce, civilization, all the things Caleb had been avoiding for years. The sight filled him with unease. "Once we're inside, we move fast," he said, studying the approaches. "Get the evidence, get out. No lingering, no unnecessary contact." "The bank's on K Street," Eliza said. "We'll need to wait until business hours. Going in after closing would draw attention. So we find a hotel, spend the night, hit the bank first thing in the morning. Together. I won't split up." Caleb glanced at her, saw the fear beneath her determined expression. She'd been hunted through these streets, beaten in some alley, left for dead. Returning took courage he couldn't help but respect. "Together," he agreed. They entered the city at dusk, just 2 more dusty travelers among dozens. The streets teemed with activity, merchants closing shops, workers heading home, women in proper dresses walking with parasols against the lingering heat. The normalcy felt surreal after days of wilderness isolation. Caleb found a modest hotel on the outskirts of the commercial district, paid for 2 rooms with cash that raised no eyebrows. The desk clerk barely glanced at them, too busy with his ledger to care about another couple of travelers. They climbed narrow stairs to adjacent rooms, and Caleb checked both thoroughly before allowing Eliza to settle in. "Lock your door," he said. "Don't open it for anyone but me." "You don't need to keep saying that. I'm not stupid. Didn't say you were, just making sure we're clear." She softened slightly. "I know. Thank you for everything." Caleb nodded and retreated to his own room, locking the door behind him. The bed was lumpy but better than ground, the room small but private. He cleaned his rifle methodically, checking ammunition, preparing for whatever tomorrow might bring. When he finally lay down, sleep came easier than expected, exhaustion overwhelming anxiety. He woke to pounding on his door. Caleb grabbed his rifle, rolling from bed in the pre-dawn darkness. "Who is it?" "Me." Eliza's voice, tight with urgency. "Let me in. Now." He unlocked the door. She pushed inside, fully dressed, face pale in the dim light from the hallway. She shoved the door closed and locked it herself. "What happened?" "They're here, in the hotel. I heard voices in the hallway. One of them was British, the man from before." Caleb's blood went cold. "You're sure?" "I'd know that voice anywhere." She moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. "They must have tracked us somehow. Maybe someone in town recognized me, sent word." "How many?" "I heard at least 2 voices. Could be more." Caleb thought fast. They were on the 3rd floor, no easy exit. The hallway would be watched. Going out the front would walk them straight into their hunters. But staying meant being trapped. "The roof," he said. "Buildings like this, there's usually access through a maintenance hatch. We get to the roof, cross to the next building, find another way down." "That's insane! You have a better idea?" She didn't. They gathered their few possessions in silence, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd learned to pack quickly. Caleb led the way into the hall, rifle ready. Empty. He found the narrow stairs leading up, little more than a ladder, and they climbed. The maintenance hatch resisted, rusted from disuse. Caleb put his shoulder into it, and it gave with a shriek of metal that sounded loud as thunder in the confined space. He froze, listening. Below the sound of doors opening, voices raised in question. "Go," he hissed. They scrambled onto the roof, into the gray light of approaching dawn. The building's tar paper surface stretched before them, sloping gently toward the next structure. Caleb ran for it, Eliza close behind. Behind them, voices shouted. They'd been spotted. A gunshot cracked. The bullet spanged off metal somewhere to their left. Caleb grabbed Eliza's hand, pulling her into a crouch as they ran. Another shot, closer. These weren't warning shots. Someone was trying to kill them. They reached the edge of the building. The next roof was lower, maybe 6 feet down, with a gap of 8 feet between buildings. Jumpable, barely. Caleb went first, landing hard and rolling. He turned back to see Eliza hesitating, fear playing on her face. "Jump, I'll catch you." She jumped. He caught her, both of them stumbling but staying upright. Behind them, figures appeared on the first roof, 3 men, one unmistakably tall and thin. The British one. He raised a pistol and Caleb shoved Eliza toward the far side of the roof. More gunfire. They ran, roof to roof, building to building, the city waking beneath them to the sound of violence. Caleb's lungs burned, his legs protesting. Beside him, Eliza gasped for air but kept moving, kept pushing. They found a fire escape on the 4th building, rusty but intact. Caleb went down first, rifle slung across his back, testing each rung. Eliza followed, and they dropped into an alley that smelled of rotting garbage and human waste. Normal city smells. Beautiful city smells, because they meant they were off the roofs, away from the gunfire. "The bank," Eliza panted. "We're close, 2 blocks. "They'll expect that. We don't have a choice. The evidence is everything." She was right. They'd come too far, risked too much. Caleb checked his rifle, then nodded. They emerged from the alley into a street beginning to fill with morning traffic. Merchants opening shops, workers heading to jobs. The gunfire had drawn attention, but in a city this size, violence was common enough not to stop the whole machine. K Street appeared ahead, wide and commercial. The Wells Fargo building stood 3 stories tall, brick and iron, solid as a fortress. Eliza led them toward it, walking fast but not running, trying to blend with the early crowd. They were 10 feet from the door when the trap sprung. Men stepped from doorways on both sides, 4 of them, armed, moving with military precision. The tall British man stood directly ahead, blocking the bank entrance. Up close, Caleb saw expensive clothes, manicured hands, the confidence of someone who'd never doubted their own power. "Miss Monroe," the man said, voice carrying that accent Eliza had described. "How persistent you've proven. And Mr. Rowan, the heroic rancher. You've both caused considerable trouble." Caleb's hand moved toward his rifle, but guns appeared faster, held by the men flanking them. 4 against 2, no cover, civilians too close. Any shooting would turn into a massacre. "Reed Halverson," Eliza said, recognition sharp in her voice. "I should have known. Webb's silent partner." The British man, Halverson, smiled. "Not so silent anymore, it seems. You really should have stayed dead, my dear. Would have been so much simpler." "Where's Dutch?" Eliza asked, stalling for time. "Your attack dog not with you today?" "Dutch is indisposed. Your rancher friend shot him when we visited his cabin. Quite unfortunate." Halverson gestured casually with his pistol. "But I've replaced him with more competent help. Now, shall we discuss this like civilized people? The evidence you stole belongs to me. Return it, and I'll make your deaths quick. Painless, even." "And if we refuse?" Caleb asked, mind racing through options. "All of them bad. Then I'll kill everyone on this street until you comply, starting with that woman there." Halverson aimed at a shopkeeper's wife opening her store. "Then the clerk. Then the child. 1 every 10 seconds until you give me what I want." Eliza's face went white. Caleb felt the trap close completely. Halverson had them, not through superior force, but through willingness to murder innocents, the worst kind of enemy. "The key," Halverson said. "Now." Eliza reached into her pocket with shaking hands. Caleb watched helplessly. every instinct screaming to fight, to do something, anything. But the guns, the hostages, the mathematics of death, it was impossible. Then everything exploded into chaos. The shopkeeper's wife, the one Halverson had threatened, threw her basket at him. Not an attack, just panic, but it startled him enough to turn his gun away for half a second. That was all Caleb needed. He lunged sideways, slamming into the gunman on his right. They went down together, Caleb's elbow finding the man's throat, crushing windpipe. He grabbed the falling pistol, rolled, came up firing. The first shot took down the gunman on Eliza's left. The second missed, people screaming and scattering. Halverson and his remaining men dove for cover, returning fire. Bullets shattered glass, splintered wood, ricocheted off brick. Caleb grabbed Eliza's arm, dragging her toward the bank entrance. The heavy door provided momentary shelter. He kicked it open and they stumbled inside, into marble and mahogany and the startled faces of bank employees. "Everyone down!" Caleb shouted, firing once into the ceiling. People dropped, screaming. "Stay down and nobody gets hurt!" Outside, Halverson's voice shouted orders. More gunfire. The bank's windows exploded inward, showering them with glass. Caleb pushed Eliza behind a marble column, using it for cover. "The vault!" she gasped. "We need the vault." "Little busy staying alive right now." "The evidence is everything. Without it, we're just murderers and thieves." She was right. Again. Caleb risked a glance around the column. Halverson and his men were advancing, using the chaos as cover. In seconds, they'd be inside, and then it was over. "Where's the vault?" Caleb demanded. A terrified clerk pointed toward the back. "Through there. But you need authorization." Eliza was already moving, key in hand. Caleb followed, firing twice to keep Halverson's men back. The vault door stood open, standard procedure during business hours. Inside, rows of safety deposit boxes lined the walls. Eliza found hers, fingers fumbling with the lock. It clicked open. She pulled out a thick envelope, sealed with wax, stuffed it inside her shirt. Got it. Now what? Now they were trapped in a bank vault with killers closing in. Caleb looked around wildly, seeking any exit. There, a service door marked Employees Only. He tried it. Locked. He shot the lock. The door opened to a narrow corridor, probably leading to back offices. They ran, Eliza in front now, navigating by instinct. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit, boots on marble, Halverson's voice commanding his men. They burst through another door into a storage room, then another into an alley. Different smell, same desperate situation. Caleb oriented himself, pointed east. "The river. We get to the waterfront, find a boat, get out of the city." They ran through streets turning chaotic with morning traffic and spreading panic. Behind them, the gunfight at the bank had attracted attention. Lawmen, citizens, everyone converging on the violence. Caleb and Eliza used the confusion, blending with crowds, changing direction twice to throw off pursuit. The Sacramento River appeared ahead, wide and brown, lined with docks and warehouses. Steamboats and barges crowded the waterfront. Caleb scanned desperately, looking for anything they could use. There, a small fishing boat, unattended, oars resting inside. He grabbed Eliza's hand, pulling her toward it. They jumped in, Caleb pushing off from the dock with an oar, putting water between them and the shore. Shouts rose behind them. Halverson's men, appearing on the dock, guns raised. But they were 50 yards out now, distance and current working in their favor. The shots went wild, splashing harmlessly around the boat. Caleb rowed hard, muscles burning, putting distance between them and Sacramento. Eliza sat in the bow, clutching the envelope that had cost so much, watching the city recede. Neither spoke, too breathless, too shocked by their own survival. They'd gotten the evidence. They'd escaped Halverson's trap. But Sacramento was behind them now, and ahead lay only the uncertain promise of justice and the absolute certainty that Reed Halverson would never stop hunting them until one side or the other was dead. The boat carried them downriver, away from civilization, toward whatever came next. The current carried them south for 3 miles before Caleb's arms gave out. He guided the boat toward the eastern shore, finding a sheltered inlet hidden by overhanging willows. They pulled the boat up onto muddy bank and collapsed in the shade, chests heaving, hands shaking from adrenaline crash. Eliza pulled the envelope from her shirt, checking the seal. Still intact. She laughed breathlessly, almost hysterically. We got it! We actually got it! Don't celebrate yet. We're alive, but that's about all we've got going for us. Caleb scanned the river, watching for pursuit. The water flowed peacefully, empty of boats. For now. Halverson knows what we took. He'll be coming. Then we need to move. Get this to someone who can use it. She clutched the envelope like a lifeline. San Francisco has federal offices that aren't under local control. If we can reach them, San Francisco's 100 miles from here. We've got no horses, limited ammunition, and every lawman between here and there looking for us. Caleb stood, offering her his hand. But you're right. Standing still means dying. So we move. They abandoned the boat and struck out on foot, following the river south but staying inland where trees provided cover. The terrain was easier than the high desert, but the heat remained brutal. By midday, they were both stumbling, dehydrated, and exhausted. Caleb found a creek feeding into the river and they drank deeply, refilling their canteens with water that tasted of minerals and mud, but was wet and precious. Tell me about Halverson, Caleb said as they rested in the creek's shade. How does a British banker end up running a criminal empire in California? Eliza leaned against a tree trunk, eyes closed. He came over during the gold rush, maybe 15 years ago. Started as a moneylender, then bought into legitimate businesses. Made himself respectable. But the respectability was always a front. Underneath, he was building something else, a network of corruption that touched everything from mining to politics to law enforcement. And Webb worked for him. Webb was the public face, the trusted banker, the pillar of the community, perfect cover for moving dirty money. She opened her eyes, staring at the envelope in her lap. The evidence I gathered shows the whole structure. Names, amounts, transactions going back years. Halverson has judges on his payroll, state legislators, even someone in the governor's office. If this gets out, it'll destroy dozens of powerful men. Which is why they'll do anything to stop us. Yes. She met his gaze. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. You deserve better than being shot at in city streets. Caleb shrugged. I made my choice back on that trail. Don't apologize for it now. He stood, offering his hand again. Come on, we need to keep moving. They walked until sunset, putting miles between themselves and Sacramento. That night they made a cold camp in a thicket of oak trees, taking turns at watch. Caleb tried to sleep but couldn't, his mind churning through their impossible situation. They were fugitives now, truly. The gunfight at the bank had made certain of that. Any lawman they approached would arrest them on sight. Unless they could find someone incorruptible, someone with enough power to look past the charges and see the truth. The idea came to him in the darkness, watching Eliza sleep. He waited until she woke for her watch shift, then shared it. The San Francisco Chronicle, he said. Newspaper, independent, not afraid of powerful enemies. If we can get the evidence to them, let them publish it. Halverson would sue them into oblivion, Eliza interrupted. Libel, slander, whatever charges his lawyers could manufacture. Not if the evidence is solid, not if it's irrefutable. Caleb leaned forward. Think about it. We can't trust lawmen, can't trust politicians, but a newspaper answers to the public. And if the public sees proof of this level of corruption, there's no covering it up. Eliza considered this, hope warring with skepticism in her expression. The Chronicle's editor is a man named Marcus Brennan. He's published controversial stories before, exposed corruption in the city government. If anyone would take this seriously, then that's our play. We get to San Francisco, we find Brennan, we give him everything. And hope he publishes before Halverson's men kill us. Do you have a better idea? She didn't. They rested until first light, then continued south, angling west now toward the coast. The journey blurred into a nightmare of exhaustion and constant vigilance. They avoided roads, stuck to wild country, living on creek water and the few supplies they'd managed to keep. Twice they saw riders in the distance and hid until they passed. Once they heard dogs baying and had to wade through a stream for half a mile to throw off the scent. On the fourth day, they stole horses. It wasn't something Caleb was proud of, but necessity overruled morality. They found a ranch house sitting alone in a valley, horses in a corral, family probably at Sunday service in the nearest town. Caleb took 2 of the best animals, left money in the barn, more than the horses were worth, but still theft. Eliza said nothing, just mounted and rode, understanding what survival sometimes demanded. The horses changed everything. They covered in hours what would have taken days on foot, putting real distance between themselves and pursuit. The country opened up as they neared the coast, rolling hills giving way to farmland and small settlements. They passed themselves off as husband and wife again, dusty travelers seeking work in the city. Nobody looked too closely. San Francisco appeared on the sixth day, sprawling across hills that descended to a vast bay. Ships crowded the harbor, hundreds of them, masts creating a forest of wood and canvas. The city pulsed with energy, commerce, immigration, growth. After weeks in wilderness and small towns, the sheer scale felt overwhelming. The Chronicle's offices are on Clay Street, Eliza said as they entered the city proper. We need to be careful. Halverson has reach here too. They left the horses at a stable, Caleb paying the attendant to keep them saddled and ready. Insurance. If things went wrong, they'd need to run fast. Then they made their way through crowded streets toward the newspaper district, blending with afternoon crowds of workers and merchants. The Chronicle building stood 4 stories tall, windows blazing with gaslight even in afternoon. The clatter of printing presses rumbled from within, the sound of information being born. Caleb felt his pulse quicken. This was it. The moment everything's either paid off or collapsed completely. They pushed through the front entrance into controlled chaos. Reporters shouted across desks, typesetters worked at machines that clanked and hissed, errand boys ran with urgent messages. The smell of ink and paper and ambition filled the air. A harried clerk intercepted them. Help you? We need to see Marcus Brennan, Eliza said. It's urgent. About government corruption. The clerk snorted. Everyone's got a corruption story. You'll need to leave a message and tell him it's about Harrison Webb's murder and a conspiracy involving state officials. Eliza's voice carried steel that made the clerk blink. Tell him a woman has evidence that will expose the whole thing. He'll want to see us. Something in her intensity convinced him. He disappeared into the maze of desks and returned 5 minutes later with a man in his 50s, shirt sleeves rolled up, ink stains on his fingers. Marcus Brennan had the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades chasing truth through resistant doors. You're the ones claiming evidence about Webb? His voice was skeptical but interested. Not claiming. Have. Eliza pulled the envelope from her jacket. Documentation of a criminal conspiracy involving hundreds of thousands in illegal funds, corrupt officials, and at least 1 murder, maybe more. Brennan's eyes sharpened. Come with me. He led them to a private office, closed the door against the newsroom chaos. Eliza laid the envelope on his desk, broke the seal, and spread the contents. Ledgers, letters, lists of names, all the evidence she'd gathered, preserved through violence and flight. Brennan examined each piece with professional thoroughness, occasionally asking sharp questions. Who compiled this? How was it obtained? Can the sources be verified? Eliza answered everything, her voice steady despite visible exhaustion. Caleb watched the editor's face. Seeing belief gradually replaced skepticism. This was real. Brennan knew it was real. The question was whether he'd have the courage to print it. This is... Brennan trailed off, studying a list of names. Half the state legislature is on here, federal judges, the mayor's chief of staff. He looked up at Eliza. You understand what publishing this means? The lawsuits, the threats, the pressure that'll come down on this newspaper? I understand that Harrison Webb is dead because of this conspiracy, that I was beaten and left to die, that powerful men are using their positions to steal and hurt people. Eliza leaned forward. Someone needs to tell the truth, Mr. Brennan. Isn't that what newspapers are for? A slow smile crossed the editor's face. You're either very brave or very stupid, Miss Monroe. Eliza Monroe. The smile vanished. The woman wanted for Webb's murder. Framed for his murder. By the same people documented in those papers. Brennan sat back, processing this new information. So you're asking me to publish evidence provided by a fugitive accused of killing the man at the center of the conspiracy. You see how that looks? I see how it looks, Caleb said, speaking for the first time. Also see that she's telling the truth. Webb was killed by his own partners when he became a liability. Miss Monroe here uncovered the scheme and paid for it with her life. or would have if someone hadn't intervened. And you are? Caleb Rowan. I found her dying on a trail outside Coldwater Creek, helped her because it was the right thing to do. Now we're both wanted, both hunted, and this evidence is the only thing that might keep us alive long enough to see justice. Brennan studied them both, editorial instincts working. I'll need time to verify this. Cross-reference the claims, contact sources. We don't have time, Eliza interrupted. The man running this conspiracy is named Reed Halverson. He knows we have the evidence. He'll be coming, and he won't stop until we're dead and these documents are destroyed. As if summoned by her words, the office window exploded. Glass showered the room as gunfire erupted from the street below. Caleb threw himself over Eliza, driving her to the floor. Brennan dove behind his desk. More shots, wood splintering, papers flying. "Back door!" Brennan shouted over the chaos. "Through the press room!" They scrambled up and ran, staying low. The newsroom had erupted into pandemonium, reporters and workers scattering. Through the broken window, Caleb glimpsed men in the street, at least 6, armed with rifles, firing systematically into the building. Halverson had found them. Brennan led them through a maze of printing presses, dodging machinery and panicked workers. They burst through a rear exit into an alley thick with the smell of ink and refuse. The editor pressed the envelope back into Eliza's hands. "Get out of the city. I'll verify what I can and publish within the week, but you two need to disappear." "They'll come for you," Eliza warned. "When the story breaks, Halverson will—" "Let me worry about Halverson. I've been printing uncomfortable truths for 30 years. I'm still here." Brennan's face was grim but determined. "Now go. Out the back, through Chinatown, lose yourselves in the crowds." More gunfire from inside the building, men shouting, running footsteps. "Go," Brennan repeated, then turned and headed back inside toward the chaos. Caleb grabbed Eliza's hand and they ran, emerging from the alley into the teeming streets of Chinatown. The neighborhood swallowed them, narrow lanes packed with people, shops spilling into the street, a density of humanity that made tracking anyone nearly impossible. They pushed through the crowds, changing direction randomly, using the chaos as camouflage. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit faded, but didn't disappear entirely. Caleb risked a glance back and saw figures following, shouldering through the crowd with the determined focus of hunters closing in. "This way," Eliza gasped, pulling him down a side street so narrow they had to turn sideways to pass. It opened into a small courtyard where old men played cards and women hung laundry. They crossed it and ducked into another alley, then another, creating a maze of movement designed to lose anyone following. Finally, breathless and disoriented, they found themselves on the waterfront. The bay stretched before them, ships at anchor, gulls crying overhead. Caleb scanned desperately for options. They couldn't go back to the stables, too obvious, couldn't stay in the city. Halverson's men would flood the streets. "There, so," Eliza pointed to a steamer preparing to depart, smoke rising from its stacks. "If we can get aboard." "Without tickets? Without papers?" "You have a better idea?" He didn't. They approached the ship, a coastal trader called the Pacific Star, watching stevedores load the last cargo. The gangplank was still down, passengers still boarding. Caleb found the purser, checking names against a list. "Last call for Oakland," the purser announced. Oakland. Across the bay. Different jurisdiction, different opportunities. Caleb made a decision, pulled out the last of his money, nearly everything he had, and pressed it into the purser's hand. "2 passages, no names on your list, no questions asked." The purser looked at the money, looked at them, recognized desperation and opportunity. "Get on. Stay below deck until we're underway." They boarded quickly, descending into the passenger deck just as shouts rose from the wharf. Through a porthole, Caleb saw men running, Halverson's hunters searching the waterfront. But the Pacific Star was already moving, engines churning, pulling away from the dock. The gap widened, 10 feet, 20, too far to jump. The hunters could only watch as their prey escaped across dark water. Eliza slumped against a bulkhead, clutching the envelope. "How long can we keep running?" "As long as we have to." Caleb sat beside her, every muscle aching. "Brennan will publish. When he does, Halverson's network collapses. We just need to stay alive until then." "And if Halverson stops the publication, bribes or threatens Brennan into silence. Didn't seem like the kind of man who bribes easy. Everyone has a price, or a pressure point. Caleb had no answer to that. She was right to be worried. They'd handed their only leverage to a stranger and hoped his integrity held against the kind of pressure Halverson could bring. It was a desperate play, possibly a foolish one, but it was all they had. The crossing to Oakland took an hour. They stayed below, listening to the engines and watching through portholes as San Francisco receded into fog. When the ship docked, they waited until most passengers had disembarked before emerging into the gray afternoon light. Oakland was smaller than San Francisco, but still substantial, a growing city with docks and warehouses, and the kind of anonymous crowds where two fugitives could disappear. They found a cheap boarding house near the waterfront, paid for a week in advance, and collapsed into a room barely large enough for its narrow bed. Neither spoke for a long time. Exhaustion had caught up to them, along with the weight of everything they'd survived. Caleb sat in the room's single chair, rifle across his knees, watching the door. Eliza lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. "What if we're wrong?" she said finally. "What if the evidence isn't enough? What if Brennan can't verify it or decides it's too risky to publish? Or then we find another way, another newspaper, another official, another plan. We don't quit." "Why?" She turned her head to look at him. "Why are you still here? You could have walked away a dozen times. Let me handle this alone. Saved yourself." Caleb thought about the question, about the real answer beneath the easy ones. He could say duty, or justice, or simple decency. All of those were partly true, but the deeper truth was something else. "The war taught me that standing by costs more than standing up," he said quietly. "I watched good men die while I survived. Spent 6 years on that ranch trying to forget, trying to make peace with being the one who lived. But peace like that isn't real. It's just running from a different kind of fight." He met her eyes. "You needed help. I could give it. Simple as that." "Nothing about this is simple." "No, but the choice was." Eliza smiled faintly. "You're either a very good man or a very foolish one." "Can be both." They lapsed into silence again, but it felt different now. Less desperate, more settled. They'd made it this far. Survived things that should have killed them. The evidence was with Brennan, the truth working its way toward daylight. All they could do was wait and hope. 3 days passed. Caleb ventured out only for food and newspapers, scanning each edition of the Chronicle for the story that would either save them or condemn them. Nothing appeared. On the 4th day, a small notice on page 6 caught his eye. Chronicle editor Marcus Brennan injured in office fire. Recovering at home. No suspects apprehended. Caleb's blood went cold. He brought the paper back to the boarding house, showed Eliza. She read it twice, face draining of color. They got to him. Halverson's men, He's alive, that's something. But the evidence, what if it was destroyed in the fire? Caleb had been thinking the same thing. Only one way to find out. "I'll go back to San Francisco, check on Brennan, see if..." "Absolutely not. They'll be watching him, waiting for us to make contact." "So we do nothing? Just hide here and hope?" Eliza stood, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "There has to be another way. Someone else we can trust with this." "Who? Name one person in this entire state with enough power to act and enough integrity not to be bought." She couldn't. The conspiracy was too widespread, too entrenched. Halverson had spent years building his network, placing people in positions of authority, creating redundancies. Even exposing him required navigating through layers of corruption, unless they went higher. "Federal authorities," Caleb said suddenly. "Real ones, not the fake marshals Halverson controls. We take the evidence to San Francisco's federal building, demand to see someone from Washington, someone outside the local system. They'll arrest us the moment we walk in. Maybe. Or maybe if we make enough noise, cause enough of a scene, someone will listen. It's a risk. It's suicide. You have a better idea?" Caleb stood, frustration bleeding into his voice. "We're cornered, Eliza, running out of options and time. Brennan's injured, possibly intimidated into silence. We can't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, Halverson finds us. So we attack. We take the fight to them, make the truth so loud they can't bury it." She wanted to argue. He could see it in her face, the fear of walking into certain danger, but he could also see her recognize the truth of their situation. Hiding had never been a permanent solution. Eventually, they had to stand and force the confrontation they'd been fleeing. "We'll need a plan," she said finally. "A real one, not just walking in and hoping for the best." They spent the rest of the day planning, working through scenarios, identifying risks and potential allies. The federal building in San Francisco housed multiple departments: Customs, Postal Service, Territorial Administration. Somewhere in that bureaucracy had to be someone who answered to Washington rather than local power brokers. The key was creating enough public attention that killing them would be impossible. If they walked in quietly, Halverson's people could make them disappear. But if they made noise, drew crowds, forced the confrontation into open daylight, it was still dangerous, still possibly suicidal. But it was also their best chance. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He stood at the window watching Oakland's streets, thinking about tomorrow. They'd cross back to San Francisco at dawn, go directly to the federal building, and bet everything on the hope that justice still meant something in a system corrupted by greed. "Caleb?" Eliza's voice from the bed, soft in the darkness. "Yeah? If this goes wrong, if we don't make it, we'll make it. But if we don't, I want you to know, thank you for everything, for stopping on that trail, for not giving up, for—" She trailed off, searching for words. "For reminding me that good people still exist." Caleb turned from the window, could barely see her outline in the dark. "We're going to survive this. We're going to see Halverson and everyone connected to him face justice. And then we're going to figure out what comes after." What does come after? He hadn't let himself think that far ahead, hadn't allowed hope to extend beyond immediate survival. But standing in the darkness with a woman who'd become more than a stranger, more than just someone he'd saved, Caleb found himself imagining possibilities. "Don't know yet," he admitted. "But we'll figure it out together." The words hung between them, a promise of futures that might never arrive. But sometimes promises were all you had. Small lights against the dark, reasons to keep fighting when logic said to quit. Tomorrow, they would walk into danger with nothing but truth and stubborn courage. Tomorrow they would face the man who'd tried to kill them and demand justice in a system designed to protect him. Tomorrow, everything would end one way or another. But tonight, in a cheap boarding house room with dawn still hours away, they had each other and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, standing up would prove stronger than all the forces arrayed against them. It would have to be enough. Dawn broke gray and uncertain over Oakland, fog rolling in from the bay to blanket the city in damp silence. Caleb and Eliza left the boarding house before the streets fully woke, crossing to the ferry landing with their meager possessions and the envelope that had cost so much blood. The early morning boat carried dock workers and merchants, people starting honest days of labor who had no idea the two quiet travelers among them were walking toward confrontation that would either expose corruption or end in violence. San Francisco emerged from the fog like a ghost materializing, buildings rising pale and indistinct. The ferry docked at 8, and they disembarked into a city already humming with morning activity. Caleb kept his hand near his rifle, eyes scanning constantly for threats. Beside him, Eliza moved with visible tension, every muscle tight with the knowledge that Halverson's men could be anywhere. The federal building stood on Battery Street, an imposing structure of granite and marble designed to project authority and permanence. They approached from the south, using the morning crowds for cover. Caleb spotted the watchers immediately. 2 men loitering across the street, too alert to be casual bystanders. More would be inside, he was certain. Halverson had probably been watching the building since the Chronicle incident, knowing they'd eventually have to make contact with legitimate authorities. "They're waiting for us," Eliza murmured. "I know, but we're not sneaking in. We're walking through the front door loud and public. The more witnesses, the safer we are." They climbed the wide steps to the entrance, passing beneath carved eagles and Latin phrases about justice. Inside, the lobby stretched vast and echoing, marble floors reflecting gaslight from massive chandeliers. A security desk stood near the entrance, uniformed guards checking visitors. Beyond that, hallways branched toward various departments: Customs, Territorial Administration, Postal Service. Caleb approached the desk with Eliza at his side, projecting confidence he didn't entirely feel. We need to speak with the territorial administrator. It's urgent government business. The guard, a tired-looking man in his 50s, barely glanced up from his ledger. You have an appointment? No, but then you'll need to schedule one. Come back next week with proper paperwork. This can't wait. Eliza leaned forward, urgency sharpening her voice. We have evidence of a criminal conspiracy involving state officials. People have died. More will die if we don't. Ma'am, everyone who comes in here claims urgency. Fill out a request form, and Caleb slammed his hand on the desk, the crack echoing through the lobby. Heads turned. People stopped, watching. Perfect. We need to speak with a federal official right now, he said loudly, projecting so everyone could hear. We have documented evidence of corruption involving hundreds of thousands in illegal funds, murder, and conspiracy reaching into the state legislature. Either you get someone down here immediately, or we start making this information very public. The guard stood, hand moving toward his sidearm. Sir, you need to calm down. I'm perfectly calm. What I am is done being patient while criminals use official positions to steal and kill. Caleb raised his voice further. My name is Caleb Rowan. This is Eliza Monroe. We're here to present evidence of crimes committed by Reed Halverson and his network of corrupt officials. Anyone who prevents us from doing so becomes part of the conspiracy. The lobby had gone silent. Dozens of people watching the confrontation unfold. Caleb felt their attention like pressure against his skin, but that was exactly what they needed. The more witnesses, the harder it would be for Halverson's people to act. A door opened on the second-floor landing. A man in his 40s descended the stairs, moving with the unhurried authority of someone accustomed to command. He wore a dark suit, carried himself with military bearing, and his eyes assessed Caleb and Eliza with sharp intelligence. I'm Thomas Whitaker, Deputy Territorial Administrator for California, he said, voice carrying clearly. I believe I should hear what you have to say. Relief flooded through Caleb, though he kept his expression neutral. Appreciate that, sir. This is a matter of some delicacy. So I gathered from your rather dramatic announcement. Whitaker gestured toward the stairs. My office. We can speak privately. They followed him up, Caleb acutely aware of eyes tracking their movement. On the second floor, Whitaker led them into a well-appointed office overlooking the street. He closed the door, gestured to chairs, and settled behind his desk with the air of someone prepared to be skeptical. You've made serious accusations, he began. I'll need to see this evidence you mentioned. Eliza placed the envelope on his desk. Everything's documented. Financial records showing illegal transfers, letters discussing the conspiracy, names of everyone involved. The architect was Harrison Webb, president of First Bank of Sacramento. When I discovered the scheme and confronted him, he was murdered by his own partners, and I was framed for it. Whitaker opened the envelope, began examining the contents. His expression remained neutral, but Caleb saw his eyes widen slightly at certain revelations. The administrator read in silence for several minutes, occasionally setting aside a document to study more closely. These names, he said finally, state senators, judges, law enforcement officials, you're claiming all of them are involved? Not claiming, proving. Eliza leaned forward. The documentation shows payment amounts, dates, purposes. Some were being paid to look the other way. Others actively participated in laundering the money. It's all there. And you obtained this how? I was a bank clerk. I noticed discrepancies, started keeping my own records. By the time I understood the full scope, Webb was already planning to silence me. Whitaker set down the papers, steepled his fingers. Miss Monroe, you're wanted for Webb's murder. There's a substantial reward for your capture. What makes you think I won't simply arrest you and collect it? Because you're a federal official who answers to Washington, not to the corrupt local network Halverson has built. Her voice didn't waver. Because those documents prove I'm innocent and Webb's real killers are still free. And because if you were part of Halverson's conspiracy, we'd already be dead instead of sitting in your office. A faint smile touched Whitaker's lips. Fair points, all of them. He stood, moved to the window, looked down at the street. I've heard rumors about Halverson for years. Nothing concrete enough to act on, but whispers. A British financier who came from nothing and rose very quickly. Always just legal enough to avoid prosecution. He's been careful, Caleb said, built his network slowly, placed people in positions where they could protect him. But he made a mistake when he framed Miss Monroe, left a witness who refused to die quietly. And now that witness has brought me evidence that could topple a significant portion of California's government. Whitaker turned back to face them. Do you understand what happens next? If I act on this, it won't be quiet. Arrests, trials, scandals. It'll shake this state to its foundations. Good, Eliza said flatly. It should. These men have stolen and killed and corrupted everything they touched. They deserve to face justice. Justice. Whitaker repeated the word like testing its weight. Yes, they do. He returned to his desk, gathered the documents carefully. I'll need time to verify some of these claims. Bring in other federal authorities. This will require coordination with offices in Washington, probably congressional involvement. Are you prepared to testify? We are, Caleb said. Whatever it takes. Then I'll begin immediately. In the meantime, you'll need protection. Halverson won't sit idle once word spreads that you've made contact with federal authorities. As if summoned by the mention of his name, the office door burst open. Reed Halverson stood in the doorway with 3 armed men behind him, pistol in hand, face twisted with rage. Step away from those documents, Whitaker. This doesn't concern you. Whitaker moved with surprising speed for a bureaucrat, his own pistol appearing from a desk drawer. I'm a federal official in a federal building. Whatever you're planning ends badly for you, Halverson. Does it? Halverson's British accent had gone cold, clipped. I have 20 men in this building, another 30 in the streets outside. You think your authority protects you? I've bought and paid for authority in this state. You're just another obstacle. Then you've made a fatal miscalculation. Whitaker kept his weapon steady, aimed at Halverson's chest. This building is federal property. Any violence here becomes a federal crime. You'll have marshals from Washington hunting you within the week, assuming anyone lives to report it. Halverson's eyes fixed on Eliza with murderous intensity. You should have stayed dead, Miss Monroe. Would have saved everyone considerable trouble. Including yourself, she shot back. But I'm very much alive, and your conspiracy is documented in those papers. It's over, Halverson. You've lost. Over? He laughed without humor. Nothing's over until I say it is. Those documents disappear, you two disappear, and life continues as before. Whitaker, you can walk away from this. File a report saying these fugitives attacked you, forced their way in. I'll make it worth your while. I'm not for sale. Everyone's for sale, it's just a matter of price. Caleb had been slowly moving his hand toward his own weapon throughout the exchange, waiting for an opening, but Halverson's men had rifles trained on them, and the mathematics were clear. Any shooting would leave bodies, and they'd probably be among them. Then Whitaker did something unexpected. He raised his voice, shouting toward the open door. Federal building under attack. All personnel. This is not a drill. The effect was immediate. Doors flew open throughout the floor, more federal employees emerging than Caleb had realized were present. Some armed, all moving with the coordinated response of people who drilled for exactly this scenario. Halverson's 3 men suddenly found themselves outnumbered, rifles swinging wildly to track multiple threats. Stand down, Whitaker commanded. All of you. Drop your weapons or face federal charges. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched like piano wire pulled to breaking. Halverson's face went through rapid calculations, weighing options, seeing his perfect plan collapse. Then he fired. The shot went wide, intended more to create chaos than kill, but it achieved its purpose. The room exploded into violence. Halverson's men opened fire. Federal employees returned it, and Caleb threw himself at Eliza, driving her behind Whitaker's heavy desk as bullets shattered windows and tore through wood. The gunfight lasted maybe 30 seconds, though it felt endless. When silence finally fell, 3 of Halverson's men were down, wounded or dead. Federal employees were checking each other for injuries, and Halverson himself had vanished, fled during the chaos. Whitaker emerged from cover, blood seeping from a graze across his shoulder but otherwise intact. Lock down the building. No one enters or leaves. Send runners to the nearest federal marshal office. We need reinforcements immediately. Caleb helped Eliza up, checking her for injuries. She was shaking but unhurt, eyes wide with shock. Did he get away? For now. Whitaker pressed a handkerchief to his shoulder. But he can't run far. Not anymore. The moment he opened fire in a federal building, he made this personal for every federal employee in the country. We'll hunt him to the ends of the earth if necessary. The next hours passed in controlled chaos. Federal marshals arrived within the hour, cordoning off the building, beginning the process of arrests and investigation. Whitaker personally ensured the documents were secured in a federal safe, copies made and distributed to multiple authorities. He gave orders with calm efficiency despite his wound, transforming from bureaucrat to military commander. Caleb and Eliza remained in his office, giving statements, providing every detail they could remember. Outside the window, they watched as more federal officials arrived, as the investigation expanded from one building to encompass the entire city. It's really happening, Eliza said softly, watching marshals escort a state senator from a building across the street. They're actually arresting them. Whitaker wasn't exaggerating about shaking foundations. Caleb pointed to another arrest, this one a judge being led away in handcuffs. This is just the beginning. Whitaker returned near sunset, arm in a sling but eyes bright with grim satisfaction. 17 arrests so far, with more coming. We've seized financial records from 4 banks, shut down 6 businesses connected to the money laundering, and we've issued a federal warrant for Halverson's arrest. Every lawman in the Western Territories will be looking for him. He'll run, Eliza said. Try to get out of the country. Possibly, but he's just one man now, stripped of his network and protection. We'll find him. Well, Whitaker settled into his chair with a wince. More importantly, we have everything we need to prosecute the conspiracy. Your evidence, combined with records we've seized, builds an irrefutable case. Trials will take months, possibly years, but the outcome is certain. And our charges? Caleb asked. The wanted notices, the accusations? Dismissed. I've already sent telegrams to every relevant authority. You're both officially exonerated. The state will issue a formal apology, probably some compensation. Whitaker smiled faintly. You're free. Actually, free. The words took a moment to penetrate. Free. After weeks of running, fighting, constantly looking over their shoulders, the concept felt foreign. Eliza's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back since the trail where this all began. What about Halverson? She asked. What happens when you catch him? Federal trial for attempted murder of federal officials, conspiracy, and about a dozen other charges. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison, assuming someone doesn't kill him first. Conspirators don't tend to forgive each other when empires collapse. The satisfaction in Whitaker's voice was clear. This was more than just an arrest to him. It was justice served against men who thought themselves above the law. Caleb understood that sentiment completely. They spent that night in a federal hotel under guard, more for their comfort than actual protection. Halverson's network was shattered, his men arrested or scattered. The danger had finally, truly passed. Caleb barely slept anyway, too keyed up on adrenaline and the surreal sensation of safety after so long without it. Morning brought news that stunned them both. Whitaker arrived with newspapers from Sacramento and San Francisco, his expression carefully neutral. You'll want to see this. The San Francisco Chronicle's front page carried the story in bold type. Banking conspiracy exposed, federal raid nets dozens. But it wasn't just coverage of the arrests. Marcus Brennan had published everything, every name from Eliza's documents, every transaction, every corrupt official. The story that Halverson had tried to prevent with fire and intimidation now screamed from every newspaper in California. Brennan's office was burned, but he'd already made copies, Whitaker explained, stored them in 3 different locations. The moment he heard about the federal building shooting, he released everything. It'll be in newspapers across the country by tomorrow. Eliza read the article twice, tears streaming freely now. He kept his word. Even after they heard him, even after everything, truth has a way of surviving, Whitaker said, especially when defended by stubborn people who refuse to quit. He set down another paper, this one from that morning. And speaking of survival, Halverson was captured in Sacramento 2 hours ago. Tried to board a steamer to Portland. Federal marshals took him without resistance. The relief was so profound, Caleb actually felt his knees weaken. It's over. It's actually over. The legal proceedings will continue for months. You'll both need to testify, probably multiple times, but the danger, yes, that's finished. Whitaker stood, preparing to leave. You're both free to go wherever you choose. The federal government is grateful for your courage and your sacrifice. After he left, Caleb and Eliza sat in silence, processing the sudden reversal of their circumstances. For weeks they'd been hunted fugitives, every moment potentially their last. Now they were heroes, their faces in newspapers, their story becoming legend. "What do we do now?" Eliza asked quietly. Caleb had been thinking about that question since yesterday's gunfight, about futures that suddenly seemed possible, about choices that had once been theoretical but now demanded real answers. "I have a ranch," he said slowly. "Small place, nothing fancy, but it's mine, paid for, sitting empty while I've been chasing across California. Could use someone to help run it." She looked at him, understanding the offer beneath the simple words. "I don't know anything about ranching. Can be learned, if you're interested in learning. And if I'm not, if I want to go back to Sacramento, find legitimate work in a real bank, then I'll help you get there. Whatever you choose, you'll have options now. Freedom to pick your own path." Eliza stood, moved to the window, looked out at San Francisco bathed in morning light. The city where she'd been hunted, where she'd nearly died, where truth had finally emerged from darkness. When she turned back, her expression held a mixture of determination and tentative hope. "I don't want to go back to Sacramento. Don't want to work in a bank, keep books for people who might be just as corrupt as the ones we exposed." She took a breath. "I want something different, something honest. If that ranch offer is real, it's real. Then I accept, on one condition. Name it. Partnership. Equal say in decisions, equal work, equal ownership eventually. I won't be just hired help, and I won't be someone you saved who owes you a debt." Caleb extended his hand. "Partners, then. Equal in all things." She shook it, gripped firm despite trembling fingers. Partners. They left San Francisco 3 days later, after giving preliminary testimony and signing paperwork that would bind them to the federal investigation for months to come. But Whitaker had arranged for most future proceedings to happen via mail or depositions, understanding their need to reclaim some measure of normal life. The journey back to Coldwater Creek took 2 weeks, traveling at an easy pace with no one hunting them, no deadline driving them forward. They stopped in towns and bought supplies, Caleb using some of the compensation money the federal government had provided. In Sacramento, they paused at Harrison Webb's grave, Eliza paying respects to the man who'd been both perpetrator and victim in the conspiracy that had consumed so many lives. "He wasn't innocent," she said, standing before the marker, "but he didn't deserve execution by his own partners. Nobody deserves that." They rode on, leaving the city and its memories behind. The country opened up as they headed east, civilization giving way to wilderness, until finally Caleb's ranch appeared on the horizon, small and weathered and exactly as he'd left it, waiting patiently for his return. Eliza pulled up beside him, studying the simple buildings and rough land. "This is it? This is home?" "If you want it to be." She smiled, and for the first time since he'd found her bleeding on that trail, the smile reached her eyes without shadow. "I want it to be." They dismounted and walked together toward the cabin, two people who'd survived violence and corruption and emerged not unchanged, but stronger for the breaking and rebuilding. The door opened to dust and stale air and the smell of abandonment, but also to possibility. Over the following weeks, they fell into rhythm. Caleb taught Eliza about ranching, how to mend fences, how to read weather, how to coax crops from stubborn soil. She taught him about keeping proper books, managing money, planning for futures that extended beyond next season. They worked from dawn to dusk, rebuilding what had been neglected, adding improvements funded by federal compensation and the reward money Sacramento had offered for exposing the conspiracy. Deputy Harris rode out one afternoon, ostensibly checking on Caleb's return, but clearly curious about the woman who'd become the talk of every newspaper in the state. Eliza met him on the porch, no longer hiding or afraid, and answered his questions with patient courtesy. By the time he left, the deputy's skepticism had transformed into respect. News continued to arrive from Sacramento and San Francisco throughout the fall. Trials began, producing convictions that sent shockwaves through California's political establishment. Reed Halverson received a life sentence in federal prison along with 43 others connected to the conspiracy. The First Bank of Sacramento was seized and reorganized under federal oversight. 3 state senators resigned, 2 judges were impeached, and the governor appointed a special commission to root out remaining corruption. Marcus Brennan won awards for his coverage, his newspaper's circulation doubling as readers demanded every detail of the scandal. He sent Eliza a letter thanking her for her courage and inviting her to visit San Francisco anytime. She wrote back promising to take him up on it, someday when the memories weren't quite so fresh. Winter came early and hard that year, snow falling in November and staying through March. Caleb and Eliza weathered it together in the small cabin, reading by firelight, talking through long evenings, building something neither of them had quite dared to name, but both recognized in quiet moments. Spring arrived with sudden warmth, melting snow and greening the rangeland. They expanded the ranch, buying neighboring property that had gone abandoned, acquiring more livestock with money carefully saved and invested. The place grew from a hermit's retreat into a working ranch with potential for real prosperity. On a warm afternoon in May, Eliza found Caleb repairing the fence line. She'd been into town for supplies and carried a letter from Whitaker. He opened it there in the field, reading quickly. "They want us in San Francisco for a ceremony," he said. "Federal government's giving commendations to everyone involved in exposing the conspiracy." "Do we have to go?" "Says it's voluntary, but they're calling us heroes, want to honor our service to justice." He looked up from the letter. "What do you think?" Eliza gazed at the land they'd been transforming, at the ranch that was becoming truly theirs through sweat and determination. "I think we've already received the only reward that matters. We're alive, we're free, and we're building something good." She smiled. "Let them send the commendation by mail." Caleb laughed and folded the letter away. "Fair enough." They worked through the afternoon, side by side, partners in every sense of the word. When evening came, they stood together on the porch, watching the sunset over land that had once represented nothing but isolation and was now a canvas for shared futures. "You ever regret it?" Eliza asked. "Stopping on that trail, all the danger and violence that followed?" Caleb considered the question honestly. He thought about the quiet life he'd been living before, the peace purchased through avoidance rather than resolution. Thought about the alternative, riding past her broken body, leaving her to die alone in the desert dust. "No," he said finally. "Not once. Not even in the worst moments. You needed help. I gave it. Everything that followed was worth that choice. Even getting shot at in city streets? Even that." She leaned against him, comfortable with proximity they'd built through shared hardship and mutual respect. "The world's better with you in it, Caleb Rowan. It's better with both of us. Together." They stood like that as darkness gathered, watching stars emerge one by one across a vast sky. Somewhere in federal prisons, corrupt men faced consequences for crimes they'd thought themselves too powerful to pay for. Somewhere in Sacramento, investigators continued untangling the conspiracy's final threads. But here, in this quiet corner of California, 2 people who'd survived violence through courage and partnership were building lives defined not by what they'd escaped, but by what they chose to create. The ranch would prosper. They would testify in trials as needed, fulfill their obligations to justice. Years would pass, bringing challenges and joys in equal measure. Other people would drift into their orbit, drawn by the story of the banker's clerk and the hermit rancher who'd brought down an empire of corruption. But the core would remain constant. 2 people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances imaginable and chosen not just survival, but partnership built on honesty, respect, and the shared understanding that standing up costs less than living with the shame of looking away. The story that began with violence on a dusty trail ended here, and the peace they'd earned through refusal to quit when quitting would have been easier. Not a perfect ending, because life never provided those, but a true one, built on the solid foundation of choices made not for reward or recognition, but because they were right. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. The stars wheeled overhead, the ranch settled into night sounds, and 2 people who'd been strangers stood together as partners, facing whatever futures would come with the quiet confidence of those who'd already survived the worst and emerged stronger for the breaking. Their story was done. Their lives were just beginning.